In this Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate several ways to create vertical hat crown decreases. The decreases of this type of hat crown can be very visible and decorative or more subtle. I'll give you an overview of the process. I'll explain how to calculate and plan for these types of crowns, and then I'll demonstrate how each of the different types of crowns are worked. Vertical crown decreases are typically worked over the top 1/3 of the hat. When it's time to start the decreases, the crown is worked by dividing the round into an equal number of sections. In this case, I have divided it into 4 equal sections, but you could do 3 or 5 or some other number. And then you work 2 decreases in each section for each decrease round. So you'd have a decrease at the beginning of the section and a decrease at the end of the section. That puts 2 decreases side by side, the last decrease of one section and the first decrease of the next. If you mirror single decreases that lean toward the other stitches of the section, then you're going to get this defined 2-stitch band of stockinette going up that divides each section. If you mirror them so that they lean toward the edge of each section instead, then you're going to get something that looks more like this, where there's this line that divides each of them, but you don't have this 2 stitches of stockinette. Alternatively, you can use a double decrease once in each section, and if you do that, you will get a 1-stitch line of decreases that goes up to the top of the crown. In order to plan out how we are going to work the crown of this hat, we have to do some calculations. So we need to know how long we want that hat crown to be and then calculate how many rounds that will be. So if we decide that our hat is going to be 8 inches in length in total, then the crown of the hat is going to be 1/3 of that. 8 inches divided by 3 is about 2.7 inches. So we need to multiply 2.7 inches by whatever our row gauge is for the hat. So if you don't already know your row gauge, you can lay a ruler down on the body of the hat and count how many rounds you have in each inch. So in this example, let's say that we are working with a worsted weight yarn and we're getting 7 rounds per inch. So we would multiply the length of the crown by the number of rounds per inch that we are getting in our hat. And that is going to give us 18.9 rounds. That's how long the crown needs to be. Obviously, we have to do a whole number of rounds, so we're going to round that up to 19. The next thing we need to do is figure out how many stitches we're going to have in each of our sections. So if we want to divide our crown into 4 sections, then we need to divide the number of stitches we have for the hat by 4. So let's say I have 100 stitches. That means I can put 25 stitches into each of these sections when I'm in order to begin working them. But let's say the number of sections that we want doesn't actually divide evenly into the number of stitches we have. Let's say that instead of having 4 sections, I wanted to divide it into 3, and I did have that 100 stitches. I would have 33 in each section, but one of them is going to have 1 stitch more than that. So if you cannot divide evenly at the beginning of the crown, you are going to have a setup round where you need to eliminate extra stitches before you begin the actual crown decreases. For my first example, I'm going to be working with 100 stitches and I'm going to divide it into 4 equal sections of 25 stitches each. The next thing we need to figure out is how many decrease rounds we have out of the total number of rounds for the crown, and therefore how many plain rounds we are going to have to distribute after the decrease rounds in order to get the total length for our hat. So I've got a little worksheet here, and I will leave a link to this worksheet down in the video description. So we've already calculated the crown length. We are not going to need a setup round because we have 100 stitches on the needles, and we can divide that evenly into 4. So the next thing we need to do is to calculate the number of decrease rounds that we are going to be working. If we are starting with an even number, and we are eliminating 2 stitches in each section each time, then we're going to end up with 2 stitches in each section at the very end. So if I have 4 sections, and I have an even number of stitches, I will end up with 8 stitches at the end. But if I'm starting with an odd number of stitches, and I'm eliminating 2 stitches each time, that means I'm going to end up with an odd number of stitches. And in this case, it will be 3. Because I'm starting with 25 stitches, then that means I'm going to end with 3 stitches. So I'm going to subtract that. That means that I am eliminating 22 stitches in each section over the course of the crown decreases. But I'm eliminating them 2 stitches each decrease round. So I can divide this number by 2 in order to know the total number of decrease rounds I will be working. Out of the 19 rounds total that I have for the crown, 11 of them are going to be decrease rounds. So 19 rounds total minus the 11 decrease rounds means that I will be working 8 plain rounds in total for the crown. So I do not need to work a setup round. To distribute 8 plain rounds, I'm going to start with 1 after the first decrease round, and then I'm going to keep working a plain round after each decrease round until I have used up those 8 plain rounds. The final 3 decrease rounds will be sequential. So I have divided up my round into 4 equal sections. I have a different color to mark the beginning of the round. If I needed to work a setup round, then I would first work around where I worked a knit 2 together at the end of any section that had an extra stitch. And then I would begin working my decrease rounds. I do not need to work a setup round. So now I can start working the decreases. We are going to work each section so that we have a left leaning decrease at the beginning and a right leaning decrease at the end. So that's an SSK and a knit 2 together. So SSK at the beginning, knit 2 together at the end. An SSK is done by slipping 2 stitches one at a time as if to knit, and then inserting the working needle through the fronts of those stitches. The working needle is pointed to the left. That tells us we are going to end up with a left leaning decrease. So if you can never remember whether it's knit 2 together or SSK at the beginning, just think about which direction your working needle is pointed when you are working the decrease. Now when I've got 2 stitches left before the marker, then I'm going to work my knit 2 together, and it's going to point right. You know it's going to point right because the working needle has to go to the right to get through those 2 stitches. We're going to slip the marker, and now we're going to repeat the decreases. So again, an SSK at the beginning, which is a left leaning decrease. My working needle is pointing left. And then a knit 2 together at the end. And this is repeated for every section until you get to the end of the round. If you have a setup round, you will work a knit 2 together at the beginning of any section that has extra stitches. You will only be working a decrease in those sections, and you will only be working a decrease at the beginning of the round. When it's time to actually work a full decrease round, you're going to start with a knit 2 together. So you're going to start with a decrease that leans away from the other stitches of the section. It's pointing to the right at the beginning. And then you work to the end of the section, and now you're going to do a decrease that leans toward the marker, away from the other stitches of this section, and that will be an SSK. And you know it's going to lean to the left because the working needle is pointed to the left. And then you would repeat that for each section of the round for the entire decrease round. Some knitters really favor the subtle vertical decrease lines. They prefer them over the ones where you have these two parallel lines of knit stitches. But one of the things that knitters will notice is that there's kind of a gap between the two decreases, and there can be kind of a large ladder that forms. So what I have here is an illustration of what's going on along that decrease line. So the red line is where the marker is. So we've got decreases happening on this side and decreases happening on this side. When we are working side by side decreases, so that the last decrease of the row is a knit two together pointing to the right, and the first one of the next section is an SSK which leans left, the stitches that get eliminated are the ones further away from the marker. So the two original stitches on either side of the marker remain, and which is illustrated with the green ones. And it's the black stitches that get eliminated. So if we look at how the stitches are always connected by a running thread on the back side of the work, one stitch to the other. And when we're done with the decreases, these two stitches are still connected to each other at the base. When we work an SSK before the marker and then a knit two together after the marker, the stitches that are getting eliminated are the ones adjacent to the marker itself. So we go from having these stitches all connected together at the bottom to having these connected to each other this way. So it's just that these stitches are kind of reaching across over the top of the two stitches that have been eliminated. So it's really just a matter of choosing between which visual result you prefer. Divide your round up into your equal sections. If you need to do a setup round, then what you need to do is to work an SSK decrease at the beginning of any section that has an extra stitch. Then as you get to the end of your setup round, stop one stitch short. Now if you don't need a setup round and you're just getting ready to start the crown decreases, again, stop one stitch short of your final round. Rather than having the marker on the needle, we want to have that marker around the first stitch of the section. So originally I had my marker between these two stitches. So this second stitch that's on the left-hand needle is the first stitch of the section. And I'm going to mark that actual stitch that's below the needle. I'm going to do that at each location around for the entire round. So this will be the first stitch of that section. So I'm going to place a marker there, and I'm going to repeat that again for each section. Now the reason that we're doing this is because that vertical line of stitches is going to be created with this first stitch of the section. When we are working this double decrease, the stitches that actually get eliminated are going to be the last stitch of the previous section and the second stitch of the current section. So we start a stitch before the end of the round because we need to eliminate this stitch with our first decrease round. So a central double decrease is worked by inserting your needle through the first two stitches as if you're going to knit them together, but then you let them slip to the other needle. So we've slipped those two stitches as if to knit two together, and now we're going to knit the next stitch that's on the needle. And then we're going to take those two slip stitches and we're going to pass them over the stitch that we just knit. So I'm going to keep my index finger on here so it doesn't come off the needle as I pull it over. So the resulting stitch is right above this marked stitch. So I'm knitting across this section until I am one stitch away from the next marked stitch. So I can see I've got the marked stitch right here, and then there's one stitch here. So now I'm going to work another central double decrease. So I slip them together as if to knit two together, knit one, pass those 2 slip stitches over the needle. And then I repeat that for the rest of the round. All of the examples that I demonstrated were in hats that were knit in stockinette. Here's a hat that was knit in a knit purl pattern, and I was able to work the vertical decreases while still maintaining the stitch pattern in this hat. Here's a hat that was done in stranded collar work, where I divided the hat into a number of different wedges and then used the vertical double decreases in order to work decreases for the crown. So in the final video of this hat crown series, I will be talking about various approaches that you can use if you are trying to maintain stitch patterns while working crown decreases. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. If you'd like a copy of the crown planning worksheet, I'll leave a link down in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.